Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully we are live. It looks like we're live at this end. I'm just checking that the presentation's coming through on the Teams link. We've got some fantastic guests. This is going to be a real giggle. We've even got the dog here, who's very, very keen to get involved. You haven't come here to listen to me, so I'm going to duck out in a second. What I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to bring in Katie. I think you all know Katie. Say hello, Katie. Great. So you're now live. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave, and then we'll bring in our guests one at a time, and we'll see what happens. It's all going to be great. It's all going to be a lot of fun. Do please get your questions coming through on the chat. We'll pick them up. We'll feed them to our guests as best we can. Katie's going to be in charge. I'm going to leave. And see you all very, very shortly.
Hi.
Hello.
Do you want to just sort of introduce yourself, say like what you studied, how you got into law?
So my name is Barnaby. I studied politics at Bristol, and then I did the GDL, the conversion course, last year, and now I'm doing the LPC, the legal practice course, this year. That's where I'm at right now.
Hi, I'm Laura. I left in 2016, I think. Studied linguistics at York University. Left there in 2019 and had a year out, worked in security for just under a year. Since then, I started the GDL in March last year and finished in December. So did the whole thing in lockdown, and now I'm trying to get a training contract lined up before I start my LPC, which will hopefully be this year, but we'll see.
Hi, I'm Anya. I left Stowe in 2019 and I'm in my second year at the University of Nottingham studying law. So not much more to say about me.
Hello, I'm Angus. I left Stowe in 2015, did a law degree at Oxford, did the LPC, and now I'm a year and a bit into my training contract at Solicitor.
Oh, okay. So I think the first obvious question here would be whether or not to study law or to do a conversion course, because we've got two here who did and two here who didn't. So what's everyone's view on that?
To the undergrad, we'll take it first.
Yeah, the undergrads go first.
I personally say that if you want to become a lawyer, don't study law just to become a lawyer. I think do it because you genuinely enjoy learning the law. I mean, the reason why I chose law at university was because I wanted a degree that would kind of be analytical, critical, but it also kind of reflects societal development. So that was kind of my reason for why I chose law. And I think it's been great. A lot of people, have warned me that it would have been a pretty dry degree. But for the most part, it's been really interesting, especially with the optional modules that I've chosen. So that's kind of my view on it.
Okay, does someone want to talk about conversions? I think we talked about you did politics and you did linguistics.
Yeah, Barnaby, do you want to go?
Yeah. So the GDL, it's definitely operates a bit differently to the undergrad degree because it's so sort of diluted into 1 year. So it is quite intense. I think for me, personally, I didn't necessarily know exactly what I wanted to do. Moving forward past university, but having an interest in politics, maybe want to definitely see that at that time. But for me, I think the GDL made a lot more sense.
I think Ryan makes a really good point, because I studied linguistics because I just wanted to. I didn't really have an idea of what career I wanted to do. I had law in the back of my mind, but I kind of wanted to explore all of the avenues I could before settling down into law. So linguistics was a good way of doing that. I had a bit of law incorporated into my course, like forensics, so it's a lot of human rights sort of stuff. I think it's really important to choose a course that you're actually interested in, because studying a 3-year course you don't like or bores you absolutely sucks. So try and find something that you're interested in. A lot of people get halfway through and they're like, I never want to practice for a career at all. So do something that you like.
I don't have a huge amount to add to that. Sorry to interrupt, but I think that's exactly right. Do what you're interested in. A large number of people, certainly in solicitors' firms, are non-law. About 50% of trainee solicitors come from non-law backgrounds, so it's definitely possible and common. If you're looking at going to the bar, there might be more of an argument for doing a law undergrad, but it is certainly not essential. And I'd definitely do what you're interested in. The only other thing to add is someone closer to the process can probably speak to this more than I can. But as I understand it, they're now merging the GDL and the LPC into some form of SQE super exam, which may well negate the time benefit that you used to get from doing an undergrad in law straight away.
Okay, yeah, you kind of just answered my next question, which was for people on the fence, you'd just say do what you'd more enjoy rather than one.
I think so. I think doing what, like as Anya says, it's a 3-year course, 3 years of your life. Obviously, depending on which university you go to, you may well find that that's pretty intense study. And if you're not enjoying it, you're just gonna have a bit of a rubbish time. I mean, the other side is it's only 3 years, so I mean, you can definitely get through it. It's fine, but it doesn't really make sense to deliberately put yourself through something that you then don't enjoy if you don't need to. So I would definitely focus on the kind of things that you're interested in.
Yeah. So moving on to people who do want to do undergrad law, what would you say makes a successful law application?
So I would say genuinely kind of think of reasons other than, for example, being a lawyer or anything to do with kind of a job in law as to why you want to do it. I mean, I already said kind of why I personally chose law, for like kind of the analytical skills, the critical thinking and stuff like that, building upon stuff you enjoy. I mean, if you enjoy kind of reading the news or like you enjoy kind of legal updates and stuff like that, and you actually think about the impact that law has on society, I mean, that would personally be like a good reason to get into law. I mean, also just kind of think about especially with law applications, I feel like it is quite heavy on kind of like extracurriculars that you can bring in to kind of support your application. So, you know, get involved with anything that, you know, like debating or anything that kind of improves upon those critical thinking skills. And also you do have the LNAT as well. So you do need to, for certain universities, you do need to prepare for that as well. So, you know, it's quite I think it is quite a hard application because it's not just the personal statement, it's the LNAT as well, which is quite time consuming at the same time.
Yeah, I also say you keep leading on to my next questions, but the LNAT and how difficult would you say that was? How did you prepare for that type of thing?
I don't know if you want to answer that, Angus, or...
I didn't do much preparation for the LNAT. It's one of those things that they say you can't prepare for. I don't know how true that is. I'm sure you can. But it's a critical thinking based test. Having some familiarity with what it's going to look like is helpful. For me, the hardest part was just working out where I had to go because it's done in the theory test, the driving theory test centers, which I thought was really strange. Yeah, I don't know. There's not a huge amount.
Okay, hang on, Angus. Yeah, I remember this quite distinctly. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's just one of those things that you find easy or you find difficult, but undoubtedly, the more practice you do in it, it's like a skill. It is a skill. It comes more readily to some than to others, and to you, it came very, very quickly and easily. He's very modest. The audience out there, he's being very, very modest because it is a very, very hard thing, and the more practice you do, it doesn't get any easier, but you do get an awful lot better. Sorry, I just had to butt in at that one. Sorry, excuse me. I'm seriously, I'm going.
No, that's good. It's scary having sort of hecklers.
checked as well when it comes to, obviously I didn't do the LMAT because I didn't do an undergrad, but situational judgment tests and things like that are something that you're going to encounter the whole time before you get into a career in law. So I'm doing at the moment for getting a training contract, like it's something that you do need to be familiar with. So whether or not you're sort of someone who's new to that sort of test, I'd say it's definitely worth being used to the format of them. And if you need practice, then do. If you don't, then don't. But it is something that you're going to need to be familiar with throughout the process anyway. So,
okay. Leading on to the next point is work experience. Obviously, in the current world, it's a little bit difficult. How important is it? How do you get it? That type of thing.
I think at uni, if you play your cards right, even if you're coming from a non-law background, you can start stacking a lot of relevant law experience if you get in quite early. So there's a lot of things. I mean, to an extent, it depends on whether you want to go down the solicitor or barrister route. But speaking personally, somebody that's going down the solicitor route, there's a lot of options and opportunities available which firms provide, especially to first-year law and non-law students who don't necessarily have any sort of like relevant or requisite experience in law. Like they do like first-year insight days. Like you can spend several days at firms, and you get to see how it all sort of plays out and see if you like it. There's a lot of stuff you can do if you prepare in advance to start building work experience quite well.
Yeah,
I think add to, oh sorry, go ahead, Annie.
you can talk.
I think I might just add as well that obviously work experience at the moment is really hard to get hold of, and when it comes to legal work experience, a lot of firms are quite sort of formulaic in how they recruit people to their work experience. So something that I found really useful throughout this year, particularly the last 12 months being sort of working from home and everything, is pro bono work, and you can do that whether you're qualified or not. And I'm working with one of the leading family practitioners in the UK at the moment through pro bono work, and I literally emailed him following the webinar saying, please, can I help? And he sort of took me on the next day, which is great. And you can do that whatever stage you're at. So you can start at A levels, you can start whenever you want. And it's a really good way of seeing what practicing law is actually like, as opposed to just getting the copies at a massive firm in London. You could be actually helping someone prepare for a case in court. So I think it's a really good idea. If you're not quite sure about law as well, if you can help out at a clinic somewhere, then it's a really good idea to be able to see what you might actually be doing as a solicitor.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, that's really helpful. Sorry, kind of tracking back a little bit. For those who do want to study law as an undergrad, what's it like in terms of workload? Because obviously you don't really do that type of topic at school. Like, what exactly does it entail?
Lots of cases, and you're doing it at the moment. So why don't you start? I'll add if there's anything. I think.
I mean, I'm probably gonna compare kind of my first year, which was kind of half actually in lectures face to face, and obviously this year's been literally all online. So for first year it was I think it would arguably less intense, just because we had the face to face kind of meetings. They had set lectures per week, so they couldn't kind of run over on lectures because they would clash with other ones. So I think it can be very intense, don't get me wrong, but it is manageable if you play your cards right, you know, because the tutorials that you have, they are there to benefit you. I mean, I have 4 tutorials per 2 weeks. I have lecture engagement sessions on top of the lectures every 2 weeks. So it's intense. There's a lot of reading, but it's not, you know, I think it's almost easier than subjects where it's like English, where you have to read like a book a week or something like that, because you know, they say to you need to read the whole judgment, but normally you just kind of skim the judgments and it will give you all of the answers and stuff. But kind of for second year and end of first year, I've noticed with COVID and all being online, it is actually a lot harder, I would say, just because they don't have a limit to how much they can set you, because they're not expecting you to be going out doing this, doing that. But then at the same time, like, you're still, you know, seeing your friends and stuff, like in your houses and stuff like that. So you're not having like kind of no social life at all. So it is, I think, definitely more difficult this year, and they're not really kind of compensating us with anything. I mean, the exams are exactly the same. So it's hard, but it's definitely a rewarding degree, I would say. So I have no regrets choosing it.
I don't have a huge amount to add to that, other than to say there's a lot of reading, but I mean that's likely to be the case with every degree. I don't think it's substantially more hard work than any other degree, or substantially less. If you read every single case that you're sat in full, then you
Yeah, for a while.
doing it all the time. And if you want to do that, that's absolutely fine. Most people don't. Most people don't read the majority of the case they're set. They'll read like the most important bits, the most important cases, and then pick up the rest in lectures and textbooks and things. You can definitely get by like that. It's not, that's not like a bad way of, it's not frowned upon or anything. But yeah, universities can be pretty hard work at times, whatever course you do.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, just
Sorry,
to add to that, like coming from somebody who did the conversion course, I think in some ways, I think how it operates is quite differently in terms of the workload and in terms of the way you sort of have to apply different techniques to studying. Because I know, as it's just been said, there's a lot of emphasis on the reading, and that's, I'm sure, very true. But certainly the GDL for the conversion course, there is reading, but I'd say more of the emphasis is more on problem questions and more on literally learning, going to the lecture, learning the law, and then applying it straight to problem questions. Basically, just doing that again and again. So it does operate slightly differently if you're doing a conversion course.
Actually, I think that's a really good point. And given that I imagine, I mean, we're talking mainly to people who are applying for university at the moment. I obviously can't see the audience, is that right? Yeah, so this is actually an interesting thing to think about when you're considering where to apply, because some universities will do, for example, exclusively problem question based exams, which is kind of like what Barnaby's just spoken about there, where it's all about just taking away a key principle. So that sometimes means sort of one-liner from each case, and it is literally just what's the law. And some universities have a much heavier focus on essay writing, and obviously some fall somewhere in between. So whereas the LPC, the GDL and the LPC is very much focused on just knowing what the law is, and some universities are the same. So it's an interesting thing to consider when you're looking at applications, and it's another thing that you can sort of leverage in your application. Sort of say, well, I'm interested in this particular university because you look a little bit more deeply into the subject and actually explore whether that should be the law as opposed to just what is the law.
Leading on, we've kind of briefly mentioned this slightly, the different routes in law, so like solicitor, barrister, what does that entail, things like that, like after university.
I think all of this here slightly think about the solicitor route, if not already there, I think. So I don't know how well posed particularly I am to talk about it, but what I would say is all of the people pursuing the barrister route that I know of, they all not only know the law inside out, but there's a buzz phrase of commercial awareness in law. I don't know if that brings fear to anyone's heart yet, but it will. It essentially, a lot of the barristers that I know are very knowledgeable on current affairs and business world and everything like that, more so than the people I know in this history. Of course, you have to be knowledgeable on that route as well, but barristers by nature have to think on the quite a lot. And I think public speaking and confidence in that respect is one thing, and that is really important. But I think your knowledge has to be there as well. So it's something to think about when you're choosing the route to go down. But what's quite nice about law is you don't have to choose until you've done, you're halfway through your undergraduate degree. You don't have to think about that right now. It's something to be aware of. If you think you want to be a barrister, you plan to get involved in school plays, I don't know, do some speeches somewhere, debating, things like that, get involved in all that sort of thing. But if you think that's definitely not for you, then don't worry about it too much.
Sorry, and in terms of like solicitor, I think you said all of you would, so I don't know who wants to talk about that, but so what made you choose that, other than maybe if you didn't want to be barrister, but like, yeah, that sort of route?
Well, I suppose I can speak to this as
an actual solicitor.
An actual solicitor.
Yeah, I have my emails in front of me now. In my experience, maybe most is too strong, but a lot of first year law students would like to be human rights or criminal barristers. That's the thing that you want to do, and then that tends to sort of somehow segue into corporate solicitor. And the reasons for that, I think, are obviously money and security play into it. But another large reason that people want to choose solicitors firms is that the work tends to be a lot more client-driven, client-focused, a lot more team-based, and a lot less academic. Barristers are actually very similar to academics in a lot of ways. A lot of barristers double up as academics. They will lecture at universities, they will write textbooks, and a lot, not all the time, but a lot of the time at the end of 3 years of studying law, that's not necessarily what everyone wants to do. So I think that's why people consider working at solicitors firms. There's certainly one of the factors that I was considering when I applied, and it's certainly true. I mean, the work is completely different. I'm not arguing cases in front of judges. I'm advising clients on, for example, takeovers, or, well, in this case, I'm in the disputes department, so I guess disputes and investigations as well, but very much looking at it from a client perspective. We liaise with the counsel team, which is what we call barristers, but they very much answer discrete questions of law, whereas we will deal with the overarching negotiation, the commercial situation, etc.
I think I might just add as well that I completely agree with everything that's just been said, and I'd add that barristers on the whole work very independently. They work out of court, and they work out of that word has just flown out of my brain. Anyway, chambers, that's one. Thank you. They work out chambers, and it's all incredibly independent, and they oftentimes find their own work. Their chambers don't call them. So I think if you very much like doing your own thing and know what you want to do, great idea to have a look at the barrister route. But if you like the sort of teamwork ethic, if you like a slightly more formulated environment, then the solicitor route is sort of possibly more suited to you. But again, it's something that you need to work out for yourself as well. I think you can't just sort of attend the webinar and listen to what they say and then that's your mind made up. I think it's definitely for exploring both routes if you're on the fence.
Agreed. And as Laura says, it's really not something that you have to decide right this second. If you think that the barrister route is something that you'd definitely like to keep open, then I would personally suggest thinking about doing a law degree. There are people who disagree with that, but I would say that because it's so heavily academic, you have a larger advantage having done a law degree than having done a different degree. So if you're absolutely sure that you want to be a solicitor, then you really don't need to have done a law degree. The conversion will be fine.
Sure. But also, just to echo that, Angus, as you said, you don't have to make up your mind at this stage. But when you get to university, you're not immediately forced to go down one route. So you can get work experience from both solicitors firms and then mini pupillage with barristers, in chambers, just to see it for yourself. I think, just to echo that, it's the only way you're really gonna.
And if you can get both, that's best. I mean, if you can, the only way you're going to know what you want to do is get as much experience as you can.
There's been a comment come up in the side chat, I'd imagine is Mr. Lloyd, saying solicitor advocates, question mark. And I think that's something that's quite good to point out about the solicitor route as well, is it's incredibly varied. So the practice that I'm in at the moment, despite the fact it's pro bono, it's quite reflective of sort of actual practice. And we do a lot of litigation, we do a lot of application, we do all sorts of dispute resolution. And I think it's quite important that there are still opportunities to fight someone's corner in a solicitor role. You don't have to go to court to do it. But the other thing, if you do want to explore the barrister route a bit more, the thing that's great at the moment is that Supreme Court goes live online, so you can watch hearings at the Supreme Court. So if you want to see what a barrister actually does, go and watch a hearing, and you can go, okay, great, I don't want to do that, or great, I do. It's a really good idea to just get familiar with the whole process.
Yeah, when I was at Stowe, I remember watching the Pistorius case religiously because I found it incredibly interesting. The cases in the Supreme Court currently are not as interesting as the Pistorius case.
There was a trial deduction one the other day, though, that was interesting. That's me being family law, but it was really cool.
There's definitely some good stuff, and you do get an idea. And it's also quite funny watching invariably old judges usually deal with technology.
Turning themselves into a trap.
Yeah, when they get knocked out of their computer.
Leading on from that, you've just kind of mentioned like cases and like watching court cases and stuff. Is there any other things like books or like certain courses or stuff that you'd like recommend for people who like just want to know more or not sure?
There's a really good book called The Secret Barrister, which I would recommend reading. I mean, it's probably a staple for law, and then Letters to a Law Student's also very useful. I think they're basically staple books that you should read if you're thinking about not even just doing a law degree, but being a lawyer in general or a barrister. And I think also as well, The Secret Barrister is quite good for if you're kind of on the fence about whether to be a solicitor or a barrister, because I mean, for me personally, after reading that, I was like, no way in hell would I want to be a barrister. I mean, you're in debt for, most people are in debt for a lot of their life. So yeah, it just wasn't for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think, there are loads of things. What's a silver lining to working from home and everything at the moment is there are so many webinars that you can go to. I did my GDL with BPP, and at the moment they're doing a load of courses to sort of bring awareness to what it's like studying law. They don't do an undergraduate course, they just do sort of postgrad stuff. So if you're looking into that sort of thing, then it's definitely worth having a look. And wider than that as well, they do have a webinar on solicitors versus barristers. They have a webinar on what things to look at and all of that sort of thing. So worth looking online for any sort of events that universities might be offering. But aside from that, reading any sort of law book, I've favoured a writer called Richard Susskind, who wrote a book called Tomorrow's Lawyers. That was really interesting and breaks it down quite well. So yeah, all sorts to look at, but I definitely recommend having a look at a few webinars run by particularly BPP, but I'm slightly biased.
Also,
can I add another bit? Well, actually, first, I agree with Anya on The Secret Barrister, which everyone should read, regardless of whether you want to be a lawyer or not. It's excellent. If you want to be a politician, perhaps you should read it, and you should think about increases to the legal aid. But the other book that I read before applying was called The Rule of Law by the late Thomas Bingham, which is short and a very, very useful and good summary of.
If you do end up studying law, remember the name Bingham as well. It's helpful.
Sorry, I forgot my question. So people who just did law degrees, where would you say there's ways that you can go that's not like law outside the courts, there's other things to do with law that's like not the direct route?
I think it's a very versatile degree. I think it's a very useful degree because the skills that you kind of acquire from it, are like the typical skills that, you could see in the city, or even kind of, I don't know. To be fair, I haven't really thought about, because I'm very set on being a solicitor, but I think the skills that you gain from having a law degree are so versatile to sort of almost any, you know, kind of obviously like not sciencey sort of things, but like non-specific kind of jobs, basically. I don't know if you want.
I think that's really important. No, to be honest, no one, unless you want to be a doctor, no one's going to write you off the undergraduate degree that you have. So if you do go into law and then decide that it's not for you, it's not going to stop you from doing anything else. Like, it's not. I wrote in response to Mr. Floyd asked me a few questions about. I think they've gone on Ask a Stoic, and he said, "What advice would you give someone choosing a course?" And I said, at the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter. Like, do something you enjoy, and it's not the be all and end all. Just get through, try and do well, and you're more likely to do well if you're doing something you enjoy. So I wouldn't get yourself up in knots about it. But yeah, it goes back to doing something you enjoy.
You also, again, you briefly kind of touched on it, but it was like how you choose the uni courses and how you chose which university you wanted to go to, things like that.
I'll just not say anything, so I'll carry on.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So how did you so you briefly touched on like how different uni courses are different in terms of like the examinations and stuff. How did you come to the like choice that you were? So like, did you choose, those you did conversion, did you have law at the back of your mind always, or was it just, as you said, what you enjoyed and then went for it?
I had a weird one when it came to law, because I had law experience with a city firm when I was just after my GCSEs, I think. And it was in their property department. And the majority of undergraduate law students or anyone looking into a career in law will say that land law and property law can be a bit dry. And that's the experience that I had. And as soon as I had like 2 weeks there, I think, and I hated it. And that for me, I was a bit like, oh, I don't want to study law anymore. Like, I not for me at all. But then I kept coming back to it. I did it a bit in my undergraduate degree, and then obviously came back to it afterwards. So I think it's difficult, but when it comes to choosing a university, I almost think that's more important than the course that you do. Almost, maybe not quite, but it's almost on par. And I think it's quite important to choose one that has sort of, obviously think about campus versus non-campus, but also think about the extracurricular stuff that you like to do. Like, I played music at Stowe, and obviously the music department at Stowe was pretty good. Got to university and it wasn't quite what I wanted, and since then I really struggled to carry it on. So I think keeping an eye on the extracurricular side of things, making sure they've got the sports club you like or something is quite important when it comes to uni as well.
If you're gonna do law, it's also worth considering little things like jurisdictions. So I don't know if this is still the case, but I was looking at Edinburgh, and they obviously do Scots law, which is very, very similar, but does require an extra year of converting to that sort of things. Worth bearing in mind.
There's a question in the chat about the degree apprenticeship. Excellent question, and I have no idea.
Yeah.
Would you recommend gaining a law degree through a route of a degree apprenticeship? Does anyone have any insight on that?
Yeah, I'm afraid that I am not actually aware of that particular route. I do understand that there's a move to sort of diversify the routes into law, and hopefully that's sort of underway, but it's certainly, at least in my firm, it's certainly more common to have done a degree.
I think what I would say, given the phrase degree apprenticeship, I'd imagine there's a certain amount of practical experience involved, which I would suggest is a really good thing to have under your belt. particularly when it comes to practicing law. So I'd say that it's a good idea, but as Angus said, a lot of, particularly the bigger firms, are still quite focused on the traditional routes. So it depends if you want to be part of a more progressive firm, I guess, or if you want to, if you like the traditionalist sort of city commercial thing, then go for that. But ultimately, in the long run, I think any experience you can get is what's going to be helpful.
Well, obviously, I know all about these, and I haven't just been Googling. But apparently, Wakeman's will offer you a degree apprenticeship where you complete your part-time study with BPP, which is, I know that's one of the general providers of the GDL or whatever it is nowadays. So these things are indeed out there, and I think you can get one from the University of Law as well. But great question. We'll look into that. And this is all an education process, really, isn't it?
They are quite competitive, though. Is the only thing. Those particular degree apprenticeships are very, very competitive because of.
Yeah, because you don't.
I think the good thing about law at the moment is that, particularly for you guys coming into it, you'll be doing the SQE now, which is something that's available to some of us from this group, but not to everyone. But it's a lot more flexible when it comes. You can be a paralegal for 2 years and qualify as a solicitor after that, as opposed to having to get a training contract. So it is a lot more flexible now. And I think it's just important to do what you think is right. If you're not great when it comes to academic environments, and you do better putting things into practice, then maybe the degree apprenticeship would be a better way for you to learn the tricks of the trade.
And just to add to that as well, it just seems like, in terms of like the sort of the legal climate, it seems that sort of route is becoming far more mainstream. Laura, as you just said, with the SQE, sort of mixing it up, making it far more open and far more about putting a greater emphasis on work experience and apprenticeships rather than just the sort of the standard mainstream channels. So I guess it's definitely becoming more and more common.
Just to sound one small note of caution, which is that lawyers are not known for their tendencies to adapt quickly to like modern developments. We tend to like tradition, and we tend to be skeptical of new things. It's not always the case. Hopefully it will not always be the case, but it certainly can be, and that's probably shown through the sort of slight lack in number of people that I know who have done these degree apprenticeships.
Okay, that's really good. I have one quite a vague question, but it's from where you are now. I know some of you are further down the line than others. What would you say to someone like A-level types trying to decide what they're trying to do? What advice do you wish you'd known, or would you think would be helpful? Again, very vague. Sorry if that wasn't helpful.
Is that with regards to a degree or like kind of jobs?
Or just general, put some money on GameStop.
What like advice would you give people doing their A-levels?
Invest in Bitcoin. Just any things from uni, or what degree course, or just jobs, things like that. Have you wished more work experience? Have you wished more reading, things like that?
I mean, if you're put off by the concept of doing law because you think there's going to be a lot of reading, I think you're going to be disappointed if you do something else. Because speaking as the politics student, we had a lot of reading. Some would say even more than law. But we're
going to get into that debate now.
Debatable. So
politics are less concise.
That's one thing. So don't let that put you off.
I think something that I was really glad that I did do was get early work experience, despite the fact that the work experience I got in law I didn't particularly like. what I don't like about how I approached that situation was the fact that I didn't ask more. I just had experience in property law and I didn't know the rest of it. Law is so varied. So what a commercial lawyer does isn't going to be the same as what a private client lawyer does. It's so different. So if you have experience in one particular field, and I'm not quite sure about this, ask someone else, attend court for a day, do something different, and keep asking the questions. I think something that's my dad's trying to drill into me at the moment is to be a lawyer, you need to have an inquisitive mind. He's not a lawyer, so I don't know what he's talking about, but he might have a point. I don't know, but I think asking questions is a really good idea. He's not in the next room, so he can't hear me and be proud of me, but I'm sure he will be.
That is a good point. Would you say there's a personality type that's more suited to law, or not at all?
I think it's more of a skill. I think it's a skill you need to develop. I'm not sure if it's necessarily suited to a specific personality.
I think there is one thing that's quite important as a lawyer, though, is to want to keep knowing about the field, because it develops the whole time. It keeps changing. So you can't just do a law degree, qualify as a solicitor, and then stop your learning. That's not how it's going to work. You need to keep knowing new developments in the law. If you didn't sort of keep learning, then what's a lawyer going to do as soon as Brexit happens and then not learn what the new rules are, et cetera, et cetera? So you've got to have the drive to keep things ticking over. It's not something that you're going to finish. You can't finish learning law.
Mm-hmm. Because I know those of you that were like in the backstage, but Mr. Floyd was talking about how it's like games of it. The sort of like games of the rules.
But yeah. Well, Mr. Floyd never told me this, but he might have mentioned it to Angus that when he was doing the LNAT. Apparently, Mr. Floyd said something about law is all about being a game. Angus?
Yeah, I don't know if I follow that. I'm sure Paul will pop up to tell us what he means, but in the meantime, I will give you a brief answer to your other question, which is to say, I think there are lots of traits that lawyers have, but I agree with Barnaby that they aren't things that you're born with, and so you can only be a lawyer if you have them. It's very much that's what the law degree or the GDL and the LPC and the et cetera, that's what it drills into you. And there tend to be some valuable things like attention to detail, and some things that, whilst they're very valuable in your professional life, like risk aversion, might be less valuable in other contexts. Yeah, I think there's lots of things, but the main thing is just interest in law, I guess.
I think quite a telling sign about a way to answer that question that's quite telling is talk to lawyers and ask them the same question, and not one of them will give you the same answer.
Yeah, well, at the firm I work for, this tagline is great minds think differently. The whole thought process. I mean, Jonathan Sumption, who's been in the press a lot recently because he's an anti-lockdown campaigner, but he was previously a Supreme Court judge. Justice. That's very American, isn't it? And I think he did something like maths undergrad or something. He's a historian. Historically, he was a historian. He's written lots of books. Like, he's not your stereotypical guy who was a lawyer. And I think Lord Neuberger, I think famously said that people with non-law backgrounds bring a lot of diversity to the profession, which is very useful. So I think the more diversity, the better, really. I mean, we want to have laws that work for everyone and are representative for everyone. So better to have no single type.
Yeah, okay. We briefly touched on it, but the different aspects of law, like the different parts of it, how did you work out what you liked? Is there any way you'd recommend people researching the different things other than just talking to people?
I'm with
You mean in terms of like the kind of modules you study, or in terms of like roots of
Either.
law?
You could talk about modules since you're still studying it.
I mean, I'll probably just touch on the modules just because I'm still obviously in university. I think there's like six compulsory modules. I mean, a couple of them I'm probably not going to enjoy just because like I don't really enjoy like public law or anything like that. But then you have the chance. Yeah, I hate public law. But then you have the chance to study kind of like optional modules, which really vary. It could be like marine wildlife. I mean, I chose for this year, I've chosen employment law and consumer and marketing law because I personally just find that really interesting. But through kind of studying the kind of foundational modules that you have to take, you kind of do direct yourself in an area that you kind of prefer. So I'm not really interested in family law, but people who studied public law, a lot of them went on to family law and kind of like international, I can't remember what the topic's called, but international sort of relations or something like that. So it just kind of depends on, I think for a lot of people kind of at my university anyway, it's the core modules that kind of help you branch out to what you actually enjoy. So yeah, that's kind of the module thing.
It's another thing to consider when you're looking at different universities is what optional modules do they offer. Oxford at the time that I was applying offered, it did pretty much only core modules. So we had 7 compulsory modules, and in the final year we got to choose 2 optionals, whereas a lot of other universities will offer a lot more option. So if that's something, if you'd rather sort of do lots of interesting and potentially more niche optional modules, then maybe apply to a university where the core modules are just the sort of absolute basic that you need for your qualifying law degree, assuming that qualifying law degree is still a thing. I think it is.
I think something I might add here as well is just that when you do a GDL, I don't know about Barney's experience, but mine was you didn't get to choose any of your modules. I had 7 compulsory modules and that was it. So if you want to have a degree that you have some niche areas in there, I'd suggest looking at the undergrad more carefully, because the GDL, you're very much, you get what you're given and you get on with it.
So do you just do the absolute basics for
we do
qualifying degree?
The core ones which qualify for a qualifying degree. So yeah, you are very much on the train tracks, as it were, and if you don't enjoy it, you know, it's sort of a not what you can do about it. So yeah, like land law, probably not the best one.
I liked land law.
Weirdly, it ends up being my highest mark, which is insanely frustrating. But
No.
yeah, it's something to think about when you're sort of tossing up between the undergrad and the GDL, is you won't be able to choose, you won't be able to do media law or anything like that if you do the GDL.
Also, just to touch upon what Angus said, is I think there's kind of like 3 strains of law courses you can do at uni. I think you have like Oxbridge, where it's very much focused on kind of the core modules and you do them in loads and loads of detail. Then you've got kind of like Nottingham, where you have the chance to do modules, kind of like optional modules. I think you get like 2 in second year and 3 in third year, but you're still learning the basic modules, the core modules in a lot of detail. And then you've got unis. I've got a friend at Kent Uni who I think she studied like 8 or 9 modules in her first year. So it's clearly like she's got loads of options to choose, but she doesn't actually study the law in a lot of detail. So it's just the breadth rather than kind of like the depth of knowledge, effectively. I think that's what you're comparing when you're choosing a law degree. So be mindful of that.
But also, you know, I wouldn't necessarily worry if you do law at undergrad and you find yourself not enjoying particular units or modules, because I think one thing is the law is so varied and it can be so vast. So actually, when you get to practicing and you're able to specialize, you can almost literally forget 90% of the stuff that you didn't enjoy or didn't really care about, because you'll focus specifically on one area.
Yes, some of my peers when I was studying were quite annoyed about the fact that we didn't have very many options at all, and so they felt very sort of constrained to just do the core ones. Whereas if you looked at some of the alternative universities on offer, as Anya and Barnaby have just said, you know, if you didn't, you could spend your sort of 1 term doing land law, and if you didn't like it, fine. Now you can go and do trespass, which is way more interesting, or media law, which is way more interesting. So if you think maybe you're the kind of person who's more inclined to want to try out lots of different options before you work out what's the one for you, then that's probably the type of course you'll want to be looking for.
I'd also add just quickly, whatever undergraduate degree you do, there's going to be a module you don't like. I studied syntax for linguistics, which is essentially really fancy grammar, and it's absolutely horrible. So there's always going to be something that you're not massively keen on. So don't let the fact that you're not going to like constitutional law put you off actually doing an undergraduate degree.
Okay, thank you so much. I think one final question, I would again kind of touch on a little bit, but trying to get your foot in the door in terms of actually getting like work experience or a job later down the line. You talked a little bit about like just doing pro bono, so just asking. Is there any other tips you could give, things like that?
I mean, I wouldn't worry about it too much, to be honest, because when I first kind of arrived at university, like there's people from all different like international backgrounds, kind of like schooling backgrounds, and to be fair, a lot of them just didn't have work experience, and they applied to kind of VAXA, like insight schemes, VAC schemes and stuff like that, and they managed to get it just kind of based off them as opposed to kind of who they know. But I think definitely, like, you know, going to Stowe, you've got probably more than likely you're going to have someone you know whose mum or dad is a lawyer. So try and, you know, just find that connection somewhere, because one of my best friends when I was in lower sixth, you know, her mum works as an employment lawyer. And I got work experience through that. So even having like a non-law kind of background with parents and stuff, it kind of helped like that. But I think don't stress about it too much, because you're all in the same boat at the end of the day, no matter if you have, you know, 5 years worth of work experience, you know, it's all down to kind of the kind of candidate you are, I think, and that's what the law firm's looking for.
I think I might add as well, what is being hammered into me at the moment is the fact that transferable skills are really important. So I came from a non-law degree. I've had a year doing sort of working in a different industry, and I'm very much being told to make the most out of it. So if you don't get legal experience, fine, go and apply to an office close to you, or do what your parents do or something like that. Just get some sort of experience. Just because you don't get legal experience, don't sit there and do nothing. Go and find something else to do, because it is already useful. I can't remember someone, I had an interview the other day, and I don't know if Stowe still do the Warriors program, but I did that when I was at Stowe. And in an interview the other day, they saw it right at the bottom of my CV and they said, oh, what's this? I ended up talking about that for half an hour, and just having something to talk about and doing something with your time is really important, whether it's legal or not.
Yeah.
Sure, not got rid of Warriors.
They shouldn't have done it.
I've really not been. I've been at the school since September, and obviously it's been a very different world. So
Yeah, it's not
the problem with the Warriors is this thing called COVID.
that would be why I don't know.
Quite a big thing. We were talking about current affairs earlier. I just cut into that point. We still do the Warriors when when pandemics allow, and it remains a very, very popular thing. Right, I'm going to duck out. I'll let Katie say thank you and circle around again at the end.
Can I just add one more thing just about what we were talking about in terms of transferable skills? I think that really hits the nail on the head. Like, no matter what you do, I'm sure like you'll be able to find some way in which to directly apply it to job applications or whatever. So there's always a way you can use it. And even then, I'd say even your extracurricular stuff. I'm not sure if necessarily if you were to compare it to legal related work experience, it would rate as equally, but it's still definitely important. And I think it helps you separate yourself out from other people. If they're receiving 2,000 applications, you know, you've got to stand out somehow. So I think it all contributes to that.
Okay, thank you guys so much. I don't have any more questions unless anyone else has anything to add. I just want to say a huge thank you. Thank you so much. This has been amazing and very insightful. I'm sure everyone who's interested in law in any capacity has found it really interesting and useful. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And if anyone watching has any questions, I'm sure Paul will circulate and I'm sure everyone's contact details. So do get in touch.